I never thought, not in my worst nightmares, that my own daughter would look at me like I was a burden. I never imagined I'd hear the words that came out of her mouth that afternoon. Go live on the street before you die, you useless old man. I can still hear the echo of her voice bouncing off the walls of the house I built with my own 2 hands. The same hands that held her when she took her first steps, the hands that worked from sunup to sundown to fill that house with love and food, were now clinging to the handle of an old suitcase as I tried to understand that this was real. The clock said 4 in the afternoon. The sun was pouring through the dining room window, lighting up the table where the scraps of lunch were still sitting. The smell of the pot roast I'd made that morning mixed with the bitter taste of humiliation. Across from me, my daughter Laura held an envelope of papers. The sale of the house was done. Not one tear, not a flicker of doubt, not a tremor in her voice. Just ice. Dad, I can't keep you here anymore. The house is sold. It's for the best. For the best? For who? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. For you too, she didn't answer. Behind her, her husband, Mark, stared at the floor, looking impatient. He never could stand me. He always hated it when I gave my opinion, hated that my presence reminded him that he wasn't the one who'd raised these walls. From the day they got married, I knew he'd be my ruin. No offense, old man, he said with a smirk, but you're not in any shape to live alone. This is better for you. My face burned. In that moment, I understood it wasn't Laura speaking. It was him. The man who had learned to manipulate her, to fill her head with poison, to make her believe her own father was a dead weight. I have worked my entire life, I said, holding back my rage. I paid for this house with the sweat of my brow, every brick, every corner. I built it all. And you built my childhood with it, Laura shot back, her eyes full of resentment. Or do you forget? You were never here, always working, always tired. You didn't give me love, Dad. You gave me a roof. That's not the same thing. Her words cut right through me. It was true. I worked too much. After her mother died, I became my own slave driver. I was terrified of failing her, of leaving her with nothing. I thought giving her security was giving her love, and now that same security was kicking me out. What about the kids? I asked, looking toward the stairs. Do they know what's happening? She looked down. I don't want you to confuse them, she said. It's better if you just go before they come down. Just then, I heard the little footsteps of Sophie, my granddaughter, running toward the dining room. She was 7, the same age her mother had been when she lost hers. She had a drawing in her hand. Grandpa, look what I made, she said, holding it out to me. It was a house with a yard and 2 people holding hands. One had white hair, the other had blonde pigtails. At the top, she had written in crooked letters, "My house with Grandpa." I felt a lump rise in my throat. I bent down to hug her, but Laura stopped her. Sophie, go with your father. Grandpa's going on a trip, she said, her voice flat. The little girl frowned, confused. Where, Mommy? To rest, she lied. He's very tired. Sophie looked at me with those big eyes, the same eyes her mother had as a little girl. Will you be back soon, Grandpa? I couldn't answer. I just stroked her hair and smiled, even though I was falling apart inside. I went to my room. Everything I once owned now fit into one old suitcase and a duffel bag. Clothes, a watch that didn't keep time right, and a photo of Helen, my wife. That photo was my only anchor. In it, she was smiling, under the very roof that was now throwing me to the curb. When I came back to the dining room, Laura was already signing the last paper for a real estate agent. She didn't even look at me. She just said, I left some money on the table. Don't hate me. I stood frozen, staring at the folded bills next to the empty flower vase. I don't hate you, honey, I said, my voice trembling. But one day you're going to understand what you've done. She turned her back to me. Mark opened the front door for me with that smile that always hid his contempt. Good luck, old man, he said. I crossed the threshold without looking back. The door slammed shut behind me, and the sound was like a gunshot. Outside, the afternoon was turning gray. I walked down the sidewalk with no idea where to go. It was a big city, but in that moment, there was no place in it for me. That night, I slept in a cheap motel with the sound of cars leaking through the window. I looked at Helen's picture over and over, wondering at what point everything had broken. Maybe love doesn't die all at once, I thought. Maybe it dies from 1,000 little betrayals, from silence, from pride. The next day, when the sun cut through the crack in the curtains, I made a decision. I wouldn't go back. I wouldn't call her. I wouldn't ask her for help. She could take my house, but she couldn't take my dignity. And though I didn't know it then, that decision was the beginning of something that would change my life forever. That first night away from my home was like waking up in a world that didn't recognize me. The city lights blinked indifferently as I walked, the suitcase bumping against my leg and Helen's photo pressed against my chest. I had spent my whole life building walls, but I never imagined I'd become a man without a roof. I found a small boarding house in an old part of town, the kind of place where time seems to have stopped. The room smelled like damp and loneliness. The walls were stained, the mattress sagged, and the only decent piece of furniture was a wobbly table by the window. I dropped my suitcase. I sat down and looked at my hands. They were the same hands that had built a house, raised a daughter, and buried a wife. But now they were shaking, not from cold, but from emptiness. I didn't sleep that night. The silence was different. In my house, silence was alive. The creak of the floorboards, the tick of the clock, the whisper of the wind through the kitchen. Here, the silence was heavy. It was the sound of defeat. At dawn, I went down to the street and just walked. I needed to work, to move my body so I wouldn't have to think. On a corner, I saw a sign. Help wanted. Maintenance. I walked into the building without hesitating. The super looked at me with suspicion. "You know how to use tools?" he asked, frowning. "I've used them my whole life," I answered. He took me to the building manager, a young guy with a cheap tie and a tired look. He asked if I had experience. I told him I'd been a carpenter, an electrician, a bricklayer. I wasn't exaggerating. I'd learned to do it all out of necessity. "The work is hard," he warned me. "We don't pay much." "I don't need much," I said. "Just a chance." And so began my quiet exile. Every morning I got there before anyone else and stayed late, cleaning hallways, fixing faucets, painting walls. I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't make myself known. I was invisible, and in that invisibility, I found a way to survive. With my first paycheck, I paid for the room and bought a notebook. That night, sitting by the window, I wrote the words that gave me strength. I won't give up, even if it hurts. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. The routine held me together. My back ached, my knees hurt. But inside me, something new was starting to grow, a calm that came from effort. I didn't need anyone to thank me. Every repair was a way of rebuilding myself. One day, while I was fixing a door on the 3rd floor, an elderly woman offered me a cup of coffee. Her name was Amelia. She lived alone and always spoke with a gentle voice. "You have the hands of someone who's worked hard," she said, watching me. "All my life," I answered. "Then you know what effort is worth." Almost no one remembers that today. Her voice made me think of Helen, of her sweetness, her faith in the small things. I stayed a while longer with Amelia, listening to her stories. She had lost a lot, too. Her son lived in another state and barely called. In her eyes, I saw the same abandonment I carried. I started visiting her every so often after work. She'd offer me tea or soup, and I'd fix something in her apartment. It was a quiet company, with no judgments or questions. In those afternoons, I found a kind of comfort I didn't expect. Empathy. One day, Amelia asked if I had a family. I hesitated for a few seconds. "I did," I said finally, "but I lost them without dying." She didn't press, she just nodded, as if she understood. The winter passed, and with it, some of the pain. I started to save money, little by little. Not much, just enough to not depend on anyone. Every bill I tucked away was an invisible brick in the reconstruction of my life. Sometimes at night, I'd find myself thinking about Laura. I wondered if she slept well, if she remembered my hands shaking as I left. But I refused to let the anger grow. Resentment is a cage, and I had already lived locked up for too long. One afternoon, while I was cleaning the courtyard, the manager approached me. "Mr. Miller, the owner of the building saw you working and wants to meet you. He says it's been a long time since he saw someone so dedicated." I looked at him, surprised. No one had called me Mr. in years. That night, I kept thinking about that sentence. "He wants to meet you." I didn't know it then, but that meeting would mark a before and after in my destiny. I looked at myself in the mirror. The face looking back wasn't the defeated man who left his house. It was someone else. Tired, yes, but stronger. Clearer. Freer. For the first time in a long time, I smiled. I'd lost a home, but I was building a new one inside myself, and though I didn't know it yet, the path to my redemption had just begun. There are nights when the silence won't let you sleep, not because there's no noise, but because there are too many memories. Since I left the house, images come back to me as if they refuse to die. The past becomes a movie playing on a loop, and I'm just a spectator who can't change the ending. That afternoon, while I was fixing a lamp in my room, I found a small wooden box at the bottom of my suitcase. I'd kept it for years. Inside were Helen's letters and some drawings Laura made when she was a little girl. When I opened it, the smell of time hit me with a strange force, as if every page held the breath of another life. The first drawing was clumsy, made with crayons that went outside the lines. 2 figures, one tall and one small, under a giant sun. Below it, in crooked letters, Laura had written, "Daddy and me in our house." I stared at it for a long time. In that piece of paper was everything I'd ever dreamed of: to belong, to protect, to love. But life, in its cruel way of turning, ends up teaching you that love doesn't always grow old with you. Sometimes it just dissolves before you even notice. I remembered when I built that house. It was after Helen died. I had Laura, just 7 years old, and a heart shattered to pieces. I promised I would build a home where she would never want for anything. I worked as a builder by day and a security guard by night. I slept 3 hours, sometimes less. I did it all hoping that one day she would understand that all that effort was love. But children don't always understand their parents' sacrifices. They see the absences, not the reasons. And Laura grew up thinking I'd left her alone, when in reality, I was killing myself for her. The first time she called me Dad, after months of not saying it, was when I bought her a bicycle. I remember her smile, her pigtails a mess in the wind. She raced around the yard shouting my name. That image was burned into my mind, a light that saved me from the darkness. But the light, over the years, began to dim. When she went to college, she started to pull away. She didn't ask for my advice or my hugs anymore. Everything I said seemed old-fashioned, insignificant. I became, little by little, a shadow who was only good for signing checks and paying tuition. I never held it against her. I thought it was part of growing up, that kids have to fly even if it hurts to watch them go. Sometimes Helen would speak to me in my thoughts. She'd say, "Don't bury yourself in your work, William. Children can't eat bricks and mortar." But I kept building walls, convinced that money and hard work were enough. I didn't understand that there are wounds love can't heal if it arrives too late. One afternoon, when Laura was 18, we had a huge fight. She wanted to move in with her boyfriend, that same Mark she would later marry. I asked her for time, for caution. I talked about commitment, about respect, about what her mother would have wanted, but she screamed at me that she was tired of living by my rules, that I didn't own her. I remember sitting on the porch swing until sunrise that night, waiting for the anger to pass. But it didn't. And something between us broke that day. I never knew how to fix it. Now, sitting in this room that smells like old paint, I think of all the times I wanted to tell her I loved her, and didn't. Men from my generation, we weren't raised to talk about feelings. We were taught to show love by working, not by talking. And maybe that was my mistake. Once, when Sophie was born, Laura called me, crying. It was the middle of the night. "Dad, I'm scared," she said. "I don't know if I'll be a good mom." I was silent for a few seconds, and then I just said, "You will, honey. Just listen to her. Hug her. Don't do what I did." That call was the closest we ever came to reconciling. For a second, I felt like the bridge wasn't completely burned. But over the years, Mark made sure to fill the gap with distance. He never forgave me for being a man stronger than his own pride. One night, in the boarding house, I dreamed of Helen. She was in the kitchen, wearing her flowered apron, baking bread. She looked at me, smiled, and said, "Don't judge her so quickly, William. Love gets twisted when the pain doesn't heal." I woke up with tears on my face. Sometimes I think she's still guiding me from some corner of time. That same morning, while I was working, a thought hit me clearly. Not everything that's lost should be forgotten. Even though my daughter had thrown me out, I could still try to understand her. Maybe not now, but someday. And with that idea, I started to write her a letter, not to send, but to empty out what was suffocating me. I told her everything, how I saw her being born, how I trembled the first time I held her, how I cried when she got married. I also wrote about my sadness, my guilt, my silences. When I finished, I folded the letter and put it in the box with the others. I don't know if she'll ever read it, but at least, while I was writing, I felt like I was talking to her like a father again. Life took a lot from me, but it didn't take the memory of having loved with all my heart. And although the wound is still open, it doesn't bleed like it used to. Because sometimes love doesn't need to be returned to keep existing. It's enough to remember it without hate. They say that fate always finds a way to tap you on the shoulder when you least expect it. I didn't believe it. After losing everything, my house, my family, my pride, I thought there was nothing left that fate could do for me. But I was wrong. It was a cold morning, the kind where the sky looks like a lead mirror and the air smells like metal. I was sweeping the hallway of the building where I worked when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "William? William Miller? Is that you?" I turned around slowly, and for a second, I thought I was seeing a ghost. It was Frank Peterson, my old buddy, the only one I shared laughs with in those tough years after I married Helen. I hadn't seen him in over 30 years. His hair, once black and wild, was now completely white, but his eyes still had the same mischievous glint. "Holy cow, it can't be," he said, smiling and slapping me on the back. "I thought you were dead, you old son of a gun." I laughed for the first time in a long time, though it was a short, dry laugh. "I almost was, Frank. Almost." We stood there talking in the lobby for a while. He told me he'd made a fortune in construction. He owned several properties, even a few buildings in the city. He listened to my story patiently, without interrupting, as I told him how I'd ended up there, cleaning hallways and fixing pipes. There was no pity in his eyes, just a mix of sadness and respect. "You were always a tireless worker," he said. "Sometimes life knocks you on your ass just to make you remember what you're made of." That sentence stuck with me all day. The next day, Frank came back. He brought me a thermos of coffee and chatted while I painted a railing. "Look, William," he said, his tone serious, "I have a warehouse over in the industrial park. I need someone I can trust to manage it. It's not much, but it's clean work, dignified work, and I want you to take it." I looked at him, stunned. "I can't accept that. You've already helped me enough just by being a friend." "I'm not doing you a favor," he replied. "I'm hiring the most honest man I've ever known." I was quiet. I couldn't remember the last time someone had trusted me, no questions asked. "Think about it," he said before he left. "Sometimes life tests you just to remind you who you are." I barely slept that night. I stared at Helen's picture, talking to her in a low voice like I used to when she was alive. "What would you do, honey?" I whispered. "Would you start all over again at this age?" The wind coming through the window moved the curtain and blew out the candle I had lit. I took it as an answer. At dawn, I made my decision. I went to the warehouse the next day. Frank greeted me with a smile. It was a big place with metal shelves, tools, stacked boxes, and the smell of fresh-cut lumber. He handed me the keys and a ledger. "I trust you, William. There are no cameras, no supervisors, just you." I felt a mix of gratitude and fear. Not because of the work, but because it had been years since anyone trusted me with anything important. The first few months were tough. My body didn't have the same strength, but my mind was still sharp. I dedicated myself to organizing the place, cleaning it, repairing what was broken. Little by little, the warehouse started running better than ever. Frank came by every week, always with that smile, and he'd say, "William, if everyone worked like you, the world would be a different place." Sometimes we'd stay late, just talking about life. He told me he never had kids, that his wife had died young, just like Helen. He had filled his loneliness with work, just like me. We were two old men, trying to understand when life had gotten so fast. One afternoon, while we were checking some invoices, he asked about Laura. "Have you heard from her?" I shook my head. "No, but I don't hate her. I just don't expect anything anymore." "Don't say that," he answered firmly. Hate rots you from the inside, William, but silence does too. Sooner or later, you've got to close that loop. I kept thinking about those words. Close the loop. I didn't know if I ever could, but something inside me started to shift. The months passed, the business grew. Frank gave me more responsibility. He even let me handle the accounts. He opened a bank account for me and insisted I save. It's never too late to have a plan, he'd say. And he was right. Every day I felt a little more alive. I'd gotten back something I thought was lost forever. Dignity. I didn't depend on anyone. I didn't ask permission to exist. One evening, after closing the warehouse, Frank took me out to dinner. During the meal, he looked at me seriously. William, I don't want you to thank me, but I do want to ask you for something. Promise me you'll trust in life again. Because if you, a man who lost everything, can still get back up, then the rest of us can too. I didn't know what to say. I just raised my glass and we toasted. That night back in my room, I sat by the window. Outside, the city lights flickered like tired stars. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like life was guiding me somewhere. I didn't know where, but it didn't matter anymore. Because I understood that even though fate can be cruel, sometimes it also has kind hands. And that hand, the hand of an old friend, had lit up my path again. I don't know exactly when I stopped feeling like a defeated man. Maybe it was a random morning when I opened the warehouse and the sunlight cut through the dusty windows, lighting up the air full of sawdust. Or maybe it was the day I caught myself humming a tune while I worked. Little signs that made me realize the sadness didn't own me anymore, that something inside me was starting to bloom again. Every day started at 6 on the dot. I liked getting there before everyone else, smelling the fresh lumber, feeling the weight of the tools in my hands. There was something sacred in that morning silence, something that reminded me I could still build, even if what I was building now wasn't walls but my own life. The warehouse became my sanctuary. Frank trusted me completely, and that gave me the strength to do more than was asked. I started organizing the inventory, finding new clients, repairing old machinery. I wasn't doing it for the money, I was doing it for the purpose. After years of feeling useless, I needed to feel like I was good for something again. One afternoon, while I was writing down orders, Frank came over with a smile. William, this place is growing more than I ever imagined. I don't know how you do it, I answered without looking up. It's not magic, Frank. I just put my heart into it. He laughed and clapped me on the shoulder. That heart of yours is worth more than any investment. We started to expand the business. We opened a second warehouse, and to my surprise, Frank put me in charge of it. He handed me the keys as if he was giving me more than just responsibility. He was giving me back my identity. You run this place, William. You're the soul of it. That night, back at the boarding house, I opened the box with the letters and Helen's picture. I looked her in the eyes, and for the first time in years, I smiled at her without pain. We did it, honey, I said in a low voice. I'm not alone. I'm not beaten. The months flew by. My hands, hardened by the years, were still steady. My steps were more confident. I started to save every dollar. Frank had insisted I open a bank account. I did, though at first I didn't think it was worth it. But watching that small balance grow was like watching my dignity grow roots again. One day at the warehouse, a young woman came in looking for a job. She had dark hair and eyes full of exhaustion. Her name was Teresa. I hired her without thinking twice, remembering the days when I too was just asking for a chance. She turned out to be a hard worker, polite, always with a kind smile. I saw a younger version of myself in her, someone who, despite everything, still believed. Thank you for trusting me, Mr. Miller, she told me one afternoon. No one else would have. We all need someone to give us a hand sometime, I replied. I had one too. Those words made me think of Frank. If it weren't for him, I'd still be sweeping hallways, resigned to my fate. Sometimes life doesn't save you with miracles. It saves you with people. Little by little, the warehouse turned into a family. We shared lunch, laughs, and problems. And in the middle of that warm atmosphere, I understood that happiness isn't always where you think you lost it. One evening, Frank invited me to his house. It was one of those big homes full of memories. We had a quiet dinner, like two old friends who had survived the years. After a while, his voice turned serious. "William, I don't want to scare you, but the years are catching up. I don't know how much longer I'll be managing my affairs. If I'm gone one day, I want you to have a piece of this." "Don't talk crazy," I interrupted. "You're as strong as an ox." "I'm not talking about strength," he said with a sad smile. "I'm talking about trust. You've earned it." I couldn't sleep that night. It hurt to think that fate was giving me something I thought I'd lost, a new chance to leave a mark. The months passed. Frank's health began to fail. I took care of the business, and I also took care of him. I'd take him to his appointments, bring him food, read him the newspaper. It was the least I could do. One morning, when I got to the warehouse, I found an envelope on my desk. Inside was a letter in his handwriting. "My friend, if you're reading this, it means time caught up with me. Don't be sad. Life gave me the gift of crossing paths with you again. What I'm leaving behind belongs as much to you as it did to me. Use what I'm giving you not to get revenge on the past, but to honor who you are, a decent man. Thank you for reminding me that kindness still existed." Under the letter were documents. Frank had left me part of his estate, including the warehouse I was now running. I stared at the paper for a long time. I cried silently, not from sadness, but from gratitude. For the first time, fate was giving me something without snatching it away later. That night, I walked down to the river. I sat on the bank with the letter in my hands and the wind on my face. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you, my old friend. I promise I won't waste your trust." The reflection in the water showed me an image I barely recognized. A calm, strong man with clear eyes. I was no longer the humiliated man who left with a suitcase. I was someone new. I had been born again. They say life comes full circle, but they never tell you how long the circle takes. In my case, it took 2 years, 7 months, and a few days. I know because I counted every single one of them. Since that afternoon, my daughter threw me out of my house with a suitcase in my hand. Since then, every day was a stone I stacked quietly, building a new destiny. After Frank's death, nothing was the same. His absence left a deep hole, but also a seed. In his will, he had left me a considerable part of his assets, the warehouse, some stock, a piece of land I barely knew. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough that for the first time in my life, I didn't have to worry about where my next meal was coming from. It took me weeks to process the idea. I didn't know how to manage money. I'd spent my whole life working with my hands, not with numbers. But there was something in me stronger than fear, the promise I'd made to Frank to use his legacy wisely. So in my 60s, I started to learn. I read books on investing, management, business. At first, it all sounded like another language, but I kept at it. I've always been stubborn. Over time, I discovered that work and intelligence don't have an age limit. I started by buying tools, then renting out construction equipment, then hiring 2 helpers. Little by little, without realizing it, I was building something of my own. What started as a small equipment rental business turned into a maintenance and repair company. I wasn't making millions, but I was living with dignity. And that, after everything I'd been through, was a fortune. Every morning, I woke up with energy. I liked the smell of metal, the sound of the engines, the routine I had created for myself. Sometimes I'd think of Frank and Helen, and I'd imagine them watching me from somewhere, proud of this stubborn old man who refused to give up. But life, just when it starts to smile at you, also tests you. One afternoon, while I was reviewing invoices in the office, I got a call from a real estate agent. He told me about a building for sale in a central part of town. He said it was a good investment, that the owner was desperate to sell. I asked for the address and jotted it down without much thought. That night, looking at the paper, my heart skipped a beat. I knew that address. It was the same street where my daughter Laura lived. For several minutes I sat there, staring at the number I'd written, not knowing whether to laugh or tremble. I didn't know if it was a coincidence or a trap set by fate, but something inside me told me I had to go. The next morning, I showed up at the building. It was a 3-story place, old but solid, with wrought iron balconies and a courtyard that reminded me of the houses of my childhood. The agent greeted me and showed me the documents. He talked fast, trying to sell me, but I was barely listening. My eyes were fixed on the doors, the hallways, the details. It all felt strangely familiar. Suddenly, a familiar voice echoed in the hall. "Mark, I told you not to buy any more things without asking me." It was her, Laura, my daughter. My whole body went rigid. I didn't dare move. She walked right past me and didn't even recognize me. She'd changed. Her hair was shorter, her face more tired, her eyes dull. Behind her came Mark, with the same arrogant air as always, just older now, with a gut and his pride intact. I stayed silent, watching them from a distance. They didn't see me. It was as if time had made me invisible, and maybe that's how it was supposed to be. When they left, the agent told me, "They're the tenants in 2B. They're having trouble paying. Been months behind." I nodded, saying nothing. Something stirred inside me, a mix of compassion and justice. Fate, that old jokester, had brought me to the very door of the people who had once kicked me out. I stayed up all night. I was torn between the past and the present. Part of me wanted to turn around and never look back. The other, quieter, deeper part told me it was time to close the loop. A few days later, I signed the papers. I did it quietly, without telling anyone. Not for revenge, but for something bigger, the need to put things in their proper place. The day I got the keys, I sat on a bench in the courtyard and looked up at the balconies. I felt a strange calm, as if every brick in the building was whispering something I couldn't quite understand. I thought about Laura, the little girl who drew houses with crayons and wrote "Daddy and Me" under a yellow sun. I thought about the woman who had thrown me out without a second glance. I thought about me, about everything I had to lose to get to this very moment. The wind blew through the trees in the courtyard, and I knew, without a doubt, that fate hadn't brought me here by accident. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for justice. Not the justice of a courtroom, but the justice of the soul. The kind that isn't signed on paper, but in the silence of your heart when you know you've done the right thing. That day, as I left the building, I looked up at the balcony on the second floor. Behind the closed curtains, I imagined the faces of those who had once denied me love, and I whispered, barely audible, "Sometimes life doesn't get revenge. It just puts everyone in the place they earned." The day I signed the papers for the building, I felt something inside me break, and at the same time, come back together. It was as if the universe, after so long, was giving me back control of my own story. It wasn't a happy victory, though. It was a quiet victory, one that carried the weight of pain and time. For the first few days, I visited the building without telling anyone I was the new owner. I walked the halls slowly, listening to the echo of my footsteps, the creak of the stairs, the distant murmur of voices behind the doors. Every corner seemed to hold a memory. I would stop in front of the second-floor apartment where Laura and Mark lived, and I'd feel my heart beat with a mix of nostalgia and sadness. It wasn't hate. It was something harder to explain, the certainty that fate was testing me. It hadn't brought me here to get revenge, but to decide who I really was. One morning, while I was overseeing repairs in the courtyard, I heard an argument upstairs. It was Laura's voice, frantic, and Mark's, answering her harshly. I didn't want to listen, but the words reached me anyway. "I told you not to buy that car. We're drowning in debt," she screamed. "Shut up, I know what I'm doing," he yelled back, using the same tone I'd heard so many times in my own house, back when I thought I was always right. A chill went down my spine. It was like the past was replaying itself, only now I was seeing it from a different angle. That daughter, who had once thrown me out for being a burden, was now trapped with a man who treated her with the same contempt she had treated me with. The irony of fate can be cruel, but it's never unfair. I didn't feel happy about her misery. I couldn't. Blood doesn't stop hurting, even if you don't love the same way anymore. But I did understand something I hadn't wanted to see for years. Laura wasn't evil. She was just broken. Broken by resentments that I myself had helped plant with my silences, my distance, with that clumsy love I never knew how to express properly. The days passed and the news traveled fast. The neighbors told me the couple in 2B was on the verge of eviction. They hadn't paid in months and creditors were after them. I listened quietly, without saying who I was. At night, I'd look at the building's deed and wonder if fate was giving me a second chance to act or to forgive. One afternoon, the manager called me. "Mr. Miller, the folks in 2B haven't paid since January. What do you want to do?" "Give them a few more days," I replied without thinking. "But sir, they've already been given extensions." "A few more days," I repeated calmly. "Sometimes people just need time to understand what they've done." The man looked at me, confused, but nodded. I knew exactly what I was doing. It wasn't weakness, it was reflection. I wanted to see just how far fate would push them before I showed my hand. That same week, as I was walking through the building, the door to 2B opened suddenly. Laura came out, her face tired, her eyes swollen from crying. She saw me as she passed, still not recognizing me. "Excuse me," she said, looking down. "Are you the new manager?" It took me a few seconds to answer. Her voice hit me like an electric current. "Yes," I said finally, "just checking that everything's in order. I'm sorry if we've caused trouble. My husband, he had some issues. I promise we'll pay this week." I nodded silently. I wanted to tell her not to worry, that she didn't have to apologize, that none of it mattered. But I couldn't. My lips wouldn't open. I felt a knot in my throat. Seeing her like this, defeated, hurt me more than I ever would have imagined. She hurried down the stairs and disappeared into the street. I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding. For years I'd dreamed of seeing her apologize, but when that moment finally came, even if she wasn't apologizing to me, I didn't feel relief. I felt compassion. I didn't sleep that night. I walked through the empty first-floor apartment, the lights off, listening to the echo of my own footsteps. I sat in a chair and looked up at the ceiling, as if I could see Helen up there. "What do I do, honey?" I murmured. "Do I give her back what she took from me, or do I let her learn what I had to learn?" The silence was my only answer. The next day, the manager insisted again. "Mr. Miller, we have the court orders ready to start the eviction. It just needs your signature." I looked at the paper on the table. It was a simple sheet, but it felt like it was made of lead. I took it in my hands. It wasn't revenge driving me. It was justice. For years, I had lived with the pain of humiliation, of abandonment. Now I had the power to decide if that pain would continue or if it would be transformed into something else. I signed the document, but I didn't order it to be delivered. Not yet. I wanted to see Laura one more time. I wanted to look her in the eyes and find out if, deep down, there was anything left of the little girl who once called me Dad. And then I understood. The opportunity fate was offering me wasn't financial or legal. It was moral. It was the chance to close a wound without getting my hands dirty, to face the past without becoming it. I still didn't know how this story would end, but something in my chest told me the finale wouldn't be about vengeance anymore. It would be about forgiveness. The signed paper sat on my desk like a stone in my soul. One phone call was all it would take for the eviction notice to arrive at the second-floor apartment. One word from me, and Laura and Mark's fate would change forever. Just as they had changed mine that afternoon, they threw me out with a suitcase. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself they deserved it, something inside me couldn't find peace. I couldn't sleep that night. I paced back and forth in the small building office, listening to the wind slip through the cracks in the windows. Every footstep echoed the past. Sometimes, when the silence became unbearable, I thought I could hear Helen's voice, not as a memory, but as if she were really there, whispering in my ear. "Don't repay pain with more pain, William." I sat in my usual chair, the one by the desk where I kept the building's documents. I took an old photo out of the box of memories. It was a picture of Laura when she was 5. She was wearing a blue dress and a smile that could light up the world. I held it gently, and I realized that no matter how much she had hurt me, that little girl was still alive somewhere in my heart. But I also remembered the man who had thrown me out with contempt. I remembered his words, his laugh, the slam of the door, the loneliness. And in that contrast, the real battle was being fought between the father who loved and the man who was still bleeding. The days passed. I didn't give the order. I watched from a distance, waiting for something. I didn't know what. A sign, maybe. One afternoon, while I was checking the building, I heard voices in the courtyard. It was Laura, arguing with Mark. I moved down the stairs a little, without making a sound, and watched them from the landing. She was crying. He, his face twisted, was screaming at her. "Don't talk to me about money, Laura. If it weren't for me, you wouldn't even have a place to live." "A place to live?" she shot back, full of rage. "I paid for this place with the little I had left from selling my father's house. His house, Mark. And I took it from him." He let out a cynical laugh. "Now you feel guilty? Too late for that." Laura covered her face and broke down crying. For a second, I saw the little girl I had raised, lost inside an exhausted woman. Mark, without another word, turned his back on her and walked out. She stayed there, alone, staring at the ground, sobbing. I couldn't stand to watch her like that. I walked down the stairs, slowly. When she saw me, her eyes widened in surprise. "You?" she said, wiping her tears. "I'm sorry for the scene. We're not having a good time." Her voice was trembling. I offered her a handkerchief without a word. She took it, embarrassed. "I promise. I'll sort out the back rent this week," she said, still not knowing I was the owner. "I don't want any more trouble." "Don't worry about that," I answered calmly. "Sometimes the problems we think are so big are just life's way of making us look back." She looked at me, confused, trying to understand my words. "Do you think looking back does any good?" she asked with a mix of pain and sarcasm. "That depends," I said. "If you look back to learn, yes. If you look back to blame, no." Laura was quiet for a few seconds. She looked down and whispered, "I've done things. I don't know if I deserve to be forgiven." In that moment, my heart tightened. I wanted to say, "I forgive you." But pride, that old enemy, stopped me. She left and I stayed alone in the courtyard. The sun was beginning to set, painting the walls orange. I realized the time had come to decide. That night, I opened the folder with the eviction papers again. I stared at them for a long time. My hands were shaking. I closed my eyes and listened to my own breathing, slow and deep. I thought of Frank, of Helen, of my entire life. I thought about justice, but I also thought about mercy. Finally, I took the paper and tore it in half, slowly, calmly, without anger. Each piece that fell to the floor felt like the weight of years dissolving along with it. I wasn't doing it out of weakness or guilt. I was doing it because I understood that the real victory wasn't in watching her suffer, but in freeing myself from the pain that had haunted me for so long. Forgiveness, I discovered that night, isn't a gift you give someone else. It's a key you use to unlock your own soul and let the peace in. I put the pieces of paper in an envelope and burned them in the fireplace. The flame danced for a moment and then died, leaving only ash. The next day, the manager found me. "What should we do about the eviction, Mr. Miller?" "Nothing," I said, looking out the window. "They can stay. But tell them the new owner wants to speak with them personally." The man nodded, not understanding. I knew the time for the meeting had come, and this time, it wouldn't be with anger. It would be with truth. Because when fate finally closes a circle, it doesn't do it with shouting. It does it with silence. The day dawned gray, as if the sky sensed what was about to happen. I woke up before dawn, unable to sleep. I got ready slowly, with the ritual of a man who knows he's about to face his past. I washed my face, combed my hair, and chose a clean, simple shirt. It wasn't vanity. It was respect. I wanted that when she looked at me, she wouldn't see a beggar or a ghost, but the man she once called Dad. They arrived at 10 o'clock sharp. The manager escorted them. I heard their footsteps in the hall, first Laura's heels, then Mark's heavy tread. My heart started pounding in my chest, but the voice inside me, the one that had learned to turn to stone after so many falls, told me, "Hold on." When they entered the office, I was standing by the window. I didn't move. "Good morning," I said without turning around. "Thank you for seeing us." "We were told the owner wanted to see us," she replied, her voice a mix of nerves and forced confidence. "I hope it's to give us an extension." I turned around slowly. I saw her. For a second, time stopped. It was my daughter, yes, but she was also a stranger. Her face was worn with exhaustion, dark circles under her eyes, a shadow of sadness that wasn't there before. She looked at me, and her whole body tensed. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice cracking. Mark jumped back, stunned. What are you doing here?" "I live here," I said calmly, "and I also own the building." The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Laura's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her eyes filled with tears. Mark, on the other hand, tried to pull himself together. "This is a misunderstanding. You can't—" "Yes, I can," I interrupted, "but relax. I'm not here to humiliate anyone." I walked slowly to the desk. I took out the empty folder where the eviction order had been. I placed it in front of them. "This is where the order was for you to vacate the building. I was going to sign it days ago, but I didn't." Laura stared at me, her lips trembling. "Why?" she whispered. "Because I didn't want to become the very people who threw me out of my own home," I answered. "Because pain, when you feed it, turns into a monster that eats you alive. And because, despite everything, I'm still your father." She broke down. She fell to her knees, covering her face with her hands. "Dad, forgive me. I didn't know what I was doing. I was young, stupid. I let him convince me." "Enough," I said softly. "It doesn't matter anymore." Mark, shifting uncomfortably, tried to justify himself. "Look, Mr. Miller, things were tough. You just took the house where I buried the memories of your mother-in-law." I cut him off. "You took my roof, Mark, but you couldn't take my dignity." He looked down. For the first time, the arrogant man from years ago looked small. Laura stood up slowly. She looked at me, her eyes red, her voice broken. "What are you going to do to us?" I stared at her for a long time. I had rehearsed that question in my head so many times, dreaming of this moment. But now that it was here, there was no anger, no revenge. Just a quiet exhaustion, the kind you feel when you finally understand that life itself takes care of putting everyone in their place. "I'm not going to throw you out," I said finally, "but I can't keep being invisible to you either. If you decide to stay here, it's on one condition, that you never, ever forget what you did. Not as a punishment, but so you never repeat the thing that destroyed you." She nodded, sobbing. "I swear, Dad. I swear this time I'll do it right." "Don't swear to me," I replied. "Swear to the woman who gave you life." In that moment, I took the photo of Helen from my pocket and placed it on the table. Laura picked it up and her cries became raw, heartbreaking. Mark said nothing. He just backed away, silent, defeated. And I felt at peace. The weight of all those years vanished. The words I hadn't been able to say for so long had finally found their place. "Helen always believed you would find your way," I told her. "I want to believe it too." She raised her head and through her tears she hugged me. It wasn't a warm or easy hug. It was awkward, full of pain and trembling. But it was real. And that was enough. We stayed like that for a long time. Outside, the sky was still gray, but inside me, a warm light was flickering on. It wasn't happiness, it was something deeper, the relief of having survived my own resentment. When they left, I watched the door close. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if they would really change, if life would make them understand. But that uncertainty didn't hurt anymore, because I understood that forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It just stops the past from destroying your future. And for the first time in many years, I felt like I could breathe, without guilt, without anger, and without fear. The reunion had been both my punishment and my redemption. Several days passed after the reunion. Laura didn't come looking for me, but I knew she would. There was something in her eyes that day, something that told me she wouldn't just leave without talking, without telling me what she'd kept silent for years. And I, though I tried to stick to my routine, felt the weight of that waiting in my chest, like a door left ajar, not quite ready to close. One overcast afternoon, while I was checking the building's maintenance logs, I heard soft footsteps approaching. It was her. She was wearing a gray coat, her face still tired, but her expression was different. There was no arrogance or fear, just a kind of sad serenity. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. "Always," I replied. She walked in slowly and sat down across from me. She stared at her hands for a few seconds, not knowing how to begin. The silence was so thick I could hear the tick of the clock on the wall. "Dad," she finally said, without looking up, "there's something I have to tell you, something I've kept quiet for years and it's been eating me alive." My heart skipped. I didn't know if I was ready, but I nodded. "Go on, honey." "When Mom died, I was just a kid, she began. I thought you neglected her. That if you had been home more, if you hadn't worked so much, maybe she wouldn't have gone so soon. Mark? He used that. He kept telling me you were selfish, that you only cared about money, that your work mattered more than your family. And I believed him. Her eyes filled with tears. He filled me with anger, Dad, a blind resentment. When we got married, he insisted on selling the house. He said it was for the best, that we could start fresh. But that wasn't it. He wanted to get rid of you. I knew it. I felt it, and I let him do it anyway. She paused, breathing hard. Her voice broke as she added, the money from the sale, we never used it. Mark lost it all in a bad deal. By the time I realized it, it was too late. And ever since, I've been living with the guilt of destroying the only good thing we had. I was frozen. I felt something move inside me, not like a wound, but like a release. It was the truth I had waited years to hear, and even though it hurt, it brought a strange kind of relief. Laura, I said softly, you have no idea how many times I asked myself what I did wrong. I thought I had failed you as a father, that you turned on me because I never gave you enough. But now I understand. You were a victim too. A victim of someone who didn't know how to love you right, she cried silently, biting her lip to keep from sobbing. Don't defend me, Dad. I was to blame too. He didn't force me to kick you out. I'm the one who said those words to you, and I haven't had a single peaceful night's sleep since. I watched her in silence. I remembered her face that day, the fury, the contempt, the door slamming shut, and for the first time, that image stopped hurting. Sometimes resentment isn't born from hate, but from fear, I told her. Fear of admitting we love too much. She looked up, surprised by my tone. Did you hate me? She asked. No, I said firmly. You hurt me. That's different. We were quiet for a few seconds. Outside, the rain was starting to fall, tapping against the window. It was a soft music, as if the world wanted to join us in this conversation. Laura took a deep breath, like she was bracing for the final blow. There's something else, Dad. Something I need to tell you before you finish forgiving me. I looked at her, not understanding. When we sold the house, she continued, I found a box hidden in your closet. It was Mom's. Inside, there were letters, a lot of them. They were for you, but you never read them. My heart stopped. Letters? Yes. She wrote them when she was sick. She begged you to rest, to not blame yourself. She said she loved you, and that the only thing she was afraid of was you being left all alone. I kept them. I didn't want you to see them. Because deep down, I couldn't stand that Mom still loved you more than me. Tears escaped my eyes. I couldn't stop them. Not from anger, but from a deep, ancient sadness. I'd lived my whole life believing Helen died without being able to say goodbye, when she actually had. Her words had just been stolen from me. Do you still have them? I asked, my voice breaking. Laura nodded and pulled an envelope from her purse. I couldn't carry them anymore. They're yours. I took the envelope with shaking hands. I opened it slowly, as if I were afraid of breaking time itself. Inside were 5 letters, in Helen's handwriting. I recognized every stroke, every curve. The smell of the paper brought me back to the days when her laugh filled the house. I didn't read any of them right then. I just held them to my chest. Laura got up, came over to me, and put a hand on my shoulder. I swear I will never hide anything from you again. I don't want to live in a lie anymore. Me neither, I replied. But now you know. You don't ask for forgiveness. You earn it. We stood there, looking at each other, as the sound of the rain filled the silence. And I understood that life doesn't always give you back what you lost, but sometimes it gives you something more valuable. The truth that lets you heal. That night, after she left, I sat alone in the office and opened the first letter. Helen's handwriting was a little shaky, but her voice felt alive in every word. William, if you're reading this, it means time won. Don't work so much. Take care of Laura. She needs you more than she knows, even if she doesn't say it. And when the pain comes, don't let it make you bitter. The love we planted won't die. It will just change shape. When I finished reading, I cried for the first time in a long, long time. But it was a different kind of crying, not of guilt, but of relief. Because I understood that, after all, I had never been alone. After reading Helen's letters, I felt as if my heart had been emptied and filled all at once. They were just a few yellowed pages, but they held everything I had needed to hear for years, that I hadn't failed, that I wasn't to blame, that love, even when it was quiet, had always been there, holding me up even when I thought there was nothing left. I didn't sleep that night. I left the letters on the desk and just looked at them. Every word from Helen was a bridge between my past and my present. For the first time, I understood that I didn't just have to forgive my daughter. I had to forgive myself too. I spent the next few days in silence, just watching the world go on. Laura started visiting me often. We didn't talk much. The simple gesture of sharing a cup of coffee was enough, with looks that said more than any apology could. Every time she came, she brought a mix of guilt and tenderness, like someone trying to repair with actions what words no longer could. One afternoon, as she was pouring the coffee, she asked me timidly, Dad, did you ever think about getting revenge on me? The question caught me off guard. I looked at her for a long moment. Of course I did, I said honestly. There were nights I dreamed of watching you suffer, of paying you back for the humiliation, but it would have been a pointless punishment. What's the point of destroying something that's already broken? She looked down. I deserved it. Maybe, I replied calmly, but life already collected its payment from you. I don't need to. Laura was quiet. I could see the exhaustion of the years on her face, the regret etched into her features. I understood then that no punishment was necessary. Her own heart was her penance. Forgiveness, honey, doesn't erase the guilt, I told her. It just stops it from bleeding. She nodded, tears in her eyes. And in that moment, I felt the wound that had bound us together finally begin to close. After that day, something changed between us. We no longer spoke like enemies, but like two survivors of a war that nobody won. She started helping me with the building's administration. She'd come by on weekends, walk with me in the park. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was real. One Sunday afternoon, as we were walking among the trees, Laura took my arm and said, Dad, I want to give you something back. She took a small key from her purse. It's for the apartment. I'm moving out with Sophie. I want to start over, without Mark. I don't want to keep living off what belongs to you. I took the key gently. I looked her in the eyes. You don't have to go, I said. This building isn't just mine anymore. It belongs to everyone who has learned something from pain. But if you feel you need to leave, then go. Just promise me one thing. Don't ever let fear run your life again. She nodded, holding back tears. I promise. That night, when I returned to the office alone, I felt a peace I hadn't felt in decades. I opened one of Helen's letters and reread it. In one part, she had written, When the time comes, don't seek justice with your own hands. True justice is living with a clean heart. If you can do that, you've already won. I smiled. I finally understood what she meant. The weeks passed. Laura moved out with Sophie, my granddaughter. I saw them often. They came to visit on Sundays. They'd bring a pie or flowers. The little girl would run around the courtyard, laughing, as if nothing bad had ever happened between us. Her laughter filled the building with a light I thought was lost forever. One afternoon, while Sophie was drawing on the floor, I watched her. Her drawing was of a house, a tree, and 3 figures holding hands. A little girl, a woman, and a man with white hair. Who are they? I asked. My mommy, me, and you, Grandpa, she smiled. You're not alone anymore. I felt a lump in my throat. I went over and hugged her, saying nothing. And I understood in that instant that all the pain had served a purpose, not to destroy me, but to teach me that love, even when it's wounded, can be reborn where you least expect it. That night, as I locked the office, I stopped in front of the mirror. I saw an old man, yes, with wrinkles and scars, but also with the calm gaze of someone who no longer owes any debts to the past. The justice I was looking for wasn't in the hands of judges or in laws or in revenge. It was in my own heart, finally clean of resentment. Because in the end, the biggest judgment we face isn't from others, but from ourselves. Time passes differently when you're not waiting for anything. It doesn't rush, it doesn't drag. It just flows like a river that keeps moving no matter how many rocks are in its way. That's how my last few months have been. Quiet, peaceful, with the calm of a man who finally understood that life isn't measured by what you own, but by what you learn to let go of. I woke up early today. The sun was filtering through the office curtains, drawing gold lines on the floor. I heard Sophie's footsteps running in the courtyard and Laura's voice laughing in the kitchen. Years ago, that sound would have seemed impossible. Now, every laugh from them is a blessing. From my window, I can see the building that was once a symbol of my revenge. Now, it's my greatest lesson. I bought it to close a wound, but fate, wise and patient, showed me that it's not about closing anything. It's about healing. I remember that day I crossed the threshold of my old house for the last time, suitcase in hand. I thought everything was over. Today, looking back, I understand that I didn't lose a home that day. I started building one inside myself. Laura has changed. She no longer walks with the pride that blinded her, but with the humility of someone who understands that love isn't something you demand. It's something you take care of. Sometimes she sits with me on the balcony and we talk about simple things, the weather, the neighbors, Sophie's dreams. We don't need to say more. In those shared silences, there is more tenderness than in 1,000 words. The little girl, with her innocence, has become the bridge between who I was and who I can still be. Every time she tells me, "I love you, Grandpa," I feel like the universe is giving me back, in one sentence, everything that was taken from me. She doesn't know about guilt or mistakes. She just sees an old man who teaches her how to water the plants and paint in the courtyard. And for me, that's enough. I've started writing again, not letters, but thoughts. I keep them in a notebook, next to Helen's letters. Sometimes I imagine that when I'm gone, Laura will find it. I hope when she reads it, she'll understand that I never held any hatred for her, only sadness. A little while ago, I finally read Helen's last letter. It was the shortest one. It was just a few lines, but it held everything I needed to finish this journey. William, when you feel like you can't go on, look back and smile. If you gave everything for love, then you never really lost anything. I cried like a child, not from sorrow, but from gratitude. She was always right. Everything I did, even my mistakes, was born from love. I worked so hard because I wanted to give my daughter the world, and even though that love got twisted, today I know it wasn't for nothing. I've learned that in the end, life doesn't charge you with punishments, it charges you with lessons. It takes away what you don't need to remind you of what really matters. A few days ago, Laura brought me a surprise. She asked me to come to the courtyard and close my eyes. When I did, I heard laughter, footsteps, and the crunch of something on the gravel. When I opened my eyes, I saw a small wooden plaque in front of the bench where I always sit. It had simple words engraved on it. To my father, who taught me you can always start over. I didn't say anything, neither did she. We just hugged. It was a different kind of hug, firm, clean, with no shadows from the past, a hug of real love. That night, as the building slept, I walked the halls in silence. I touched the walls, the railings, the door frames. Every corner held a piece of my story. I'd worked here, cried here, forgiven, and been reborn here. In every brick there was a piece of the man I was, of the father I learned to be. Late, but just in time. I stopped in front of the lobby mirror and looked at my reflection. The wrinkles were deeper, the hair whiter, but in my eyes, I saw something I hadn't recognized in years. Peace. And I knew, with a quiet certainty, that this was the real prize. I don't know how much time I have left, and I don't care. What I know is that I don't have any more debts to settle, not with Laura, not with Mark, and not with myself. Forgiveness made me free. And at my age, freedom is the greatest gift you can receive. Tonight, before I sleep, I'll read one of Helen's letters again. Not for nostalgia, but for company. I don't cry when I read them anymore. Now, I just feel her close, in every laugh from Sophie, in every glance from Laura, in every quiet sunrise. Because in the end, life isn't about punishing or winning. It's about understanding. It's about accepting that everything that happened, The pain, the humiliation, the loss was necessary to reach this moment, the moment of peace. And when my time comes, I know I'll go with a smile, knowing I did the hardest thing a human being can do, to forgive without forgetting, to love without expecting, to keep walking without resentment. I'll close my eyes and I'll picture that old house that doesn't exist anymore, with its bright walls and its garden full of flowers. Helen will be at the door, smiling, with a little Laura running into my arms. And then I'll understand, once and for all, that home wasn't a place. It was a moment in the hearts of the people we love. Sometimes life takes us down paths that hurt, but every wound teaches, and every loss leaves a mark that guides us toward peace. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting what was done to us. It means releasing the weight of what we can no longer change. Because in the end, only those who have truly suffered understand that love, even when it's broken, is the only thing worth holding on to. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Every day we share new stories that will make you reflect on family, life, and the courage to keep going.